Think about your favorite song. The very first time you heard it, you might not have thought much of it. But after hearing it on the radio, in a cafe, or on repeat in your playlist, it started to grow on you. That's not an accident, it's psychology at work. This phenomenon is called the mere exposure effect. It's the idea that simply being exposed to something repeatedly makes us more likely to like it. No big change, no deep reasoning, just familiarity slowly turning into preference. The concept was first studied in the 1960s by psychologist Robert Zajonc. He showed people nonsense words, shapes, or unfamiliar faces multiple times. The more participants saw a particular stimulus, the more positively they rated it. The content didn't matter, what mattered was repetition. Why does this happen? At its core, familiarity feels safe. Our brains evolved to be cautious around the unknown. Something new could mean danger, while something familiar signaled security. So when we see or hear something again and again without harm, our brain tags it as safe. Over time, that safety morphs into liking. You can see this in everyday life. Ever notice how a brand logo or jingle sticks with you, even if you don't consciously pay attention to it? Advertisers know that repeated exposure can build affection. A product doesn't have to convince you it's the best, it just has to show up in front of you often enough to feel familiar. The mere exposure effect also shapes our social lives. Think about classmates, colleagues, or neighbors. The people you see regularly, even if you don't interact deeply, often feel more likable simply because they're part of your daily environment. This is one reason friendships and relationships often form in workplaces, schools, or communities. Proximity plus repetition builds connection. It also explains why certain celebrities, influencers, or politicians gain popularity. The more we see their faces, the more familiar they become, and that familiarity can mistakenly feel like trust or admiration. This effect is so strong that media exposure alone can increase a person's appeal, regardless of what they actually do or say. Music is one of the clearest examples. A new song might sound strange at first. But after the 5th or 10th listen, you find yourself humming along. Psychologists call this the mere exposure curve. At first, repeated exposure increases liking. But after too much repetition, the curve can dip, familiarity turns into boredom or even annoyance. That's why overplayed songs on the radio can go from catchy to unbearable. The effect doesn't just apply to sounds and faces, it influences tastes, fashion, and even ideas. A certain style of clothing might look odd the first time you see it. But after it appears again and again in magazines, on TV, and in your social circle, it starts to feel normal and eventually stylish. Trends often rely less on actual innovation and more on repeated exposure until people adopt them. There's also a darker side. Repetition can make false information feel true. Psychologists call this the illusory truth effect. When a statement is repeated often enough, people begin to accept it, even if it's inaccurate. That's why propaganda and misinformation campaigns lean heavily on repetition. Familiarity can override critical thinking. Still, the mere exposure effect has benefits. It can help us appreciate things we'd otherwise overlook. It can make new environments feel comfortable, turning strangeness into belonging. Think of moving to a new city or starting at a new job. The first days may feel alien, but over time, the same hallways, faces, and routines become part of home. Marketers, of course, use this principle constantly. That's why ads appear in multiple formats: billboards, online banners, TV spots, product placements. You may not buy the product right away, but each exposure plants a seed. When the time comes to choose, your brain leans toward the familiar option, even if you don't consciously realize why. But awareness can give us power. Knowing about the mere exposure effect helps us question why we like certain things. Do we genuinely enjoy this product, person, or idea, or do we just feel comfortable because we've seen it so many times? This self-awareness is especially important in an age of constant advertising and media repetition. The effect also offers opportunities. If you want to build healthier habits, for example, repeated exposure can help. Keeping fruits on the counter, leaving books where you'll see them, or placing workout clothes in view increases familiarity. Over time, those visual cues become more inviting, not less. Relationships benefit from the same principle. Simply spending time with people consistently, whether through shared activities, conversations, or just presence, can deepen bonds. That's one reason long-distance friendships or relationships require more effort. Without exposure, the sense of closeness fades. In the end, the mere exposure effect reminds us of a simple truth: repetition shapes preference. Familiarity turns the neutral into the likable, and the strange into the comfortable. It's why we grow attached to songs, brands, faces, and even places. Of course, repetition isn't magic. It can't make us love everything. Too much exposure can backfire, and sometimes novelty excites us more than familiarity. But in countless moments, from the clothes we wear to the people we trust, the subtle power of seeing something again and again guides our choices more than we realize.